Welcome to Tangents, the new podcast from Coin Center. This time, your host is me, Niraj, the comms guy at Coin Center. I'm joined today by Mike Orcutt, a journalist at The Block, a cryptocurrency news site. We'll be talking about all things the discourse and Twitter and everything like that. So if you're one of the many people who is exhausted by that topic, sorry in advance. So Mike, thank you for joining us, or me, I guess.
Thanks for having me on.
So we've been chatting a bit about this subject, and I think that you have a lot to say. So why don't we start by you just introducing yourself?
Cool. I am a reporter, and I was trained I went to journalism school and learned how to be a quote unquote science journalist at NYU. But the way that I look at what I read about, I mean, it is through the lens of science, but it's more like through the lens of I guess if you think about like a laboratory analogy, I try to figure out like what some of the laboratory curiosities are that are the most interesting, and try to figure out how they might evolve, so where they might be going and what that might mean for us, from a technological sort of innovation, quote unquote, standpoint.
And is that what brought you to cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so I was at Tech Review, and I got kind of drafted to write about crypto in 2017, and everyone was really interested in the topic at the time, obviously, and I'd written about Bitcoin a few times. And so I was sort of the only one on the team that had the experience writing about it. And we launched a newsletter called Chain Letter that summer, and sort of that newsletter in a way sort of led me to The Block, and I'm the news editor. We have a pretty small team, so it's very different from where I was before. But so I've got thoughts about media in general, as well as sort of crypto media specifically.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll spare everybody by trying to steer us a little bit away from cryptocurrency and crypto media. So like I mentioned, we've been chatting hereabouts just kind of as we both watch what is unfolding on Twitter over the last couple months from our various perspectives. And I think that you have sort of a more nuanced view than what the most visible people on Twitter, on both the media, the tech, and every other side, the policy side, everything that is being said out there. So to start, I think kind of the question that we settled on in our chats was, is Twitter real life, right? And that's a common question. So what do you think about that?
I mean, I don't really know where to start. It's like we've talked about this a few times, and so then each time that we've talked, we've sort of started at a different place, like for whatever reason. I think this one, it's interesting that you bring up like the people that are most visible. Like, I guess thinking about it in the context of journalists, the journalists that are most visible on Twitter, and sort of looking into the question of why that is to begin with, why those people are most visible. Like how much of that is the platform, and how much of that is sort of people getting in early. I think we've talked about how Twitter has changed a lot over the past several years, and how much of that is just sort of branding on the part of the individual, similar to what you see in like any other sort of profession that leans on Twitter that way.
So kind of like how anyone who got on in 2008 and realized that this is going to be an important platform built a following then, kind of back when everybody followed everyone else, and they now have an outsized kind of voice and influence on the platform, even if maybe their influence would not have been maintained over the decade had that not happened.
Maybe. There's some interesting early adopter effect that spans a lot of different sort of areas of interest and expertise on Twitter, that has dictated who has risen to the point of being an influencer or whatever, which is interesting to me because I started I think we both maybe started 2008, 2007 on the platform, and it was just a lot different back then. And the way that I sort of saw it is like it kind of grew out of this blogging scene that were they were reporters, political reporters, but also sort of people that were commentating and sort of blurring the lines to some degree in the blogging sphere. And that was the popular thing, like back in the early 2000s. And then when Twitter sort of came along, I think some of those people just naturally moved to the new platform and then developed an audience that today is much larger than like maybe they imagined they were going to get by joining the platform early like that. It was just sort of a natural extension. But I don't know how far across the board that applies, but it seems like that in many cases.
So now we have this world where some people have a lot of influence on this platform. Either they got it because they were early adopters, or they got it because they of late were adding a lot of value to kind of modern conversations versus ones that maybe were relevant a decade ago. But now we have this world. So what does it mean that these people have the ability to sort of affect what so many other people see? Is that actually important, or is that more like just a sideshow?
I don't think it's a sideshow. I think it's important, but I also think it's worth thinking about that. Like it's a responsibility. I think that's the way I see it, but I see it that way because of my profession, I think, and so a lot of what journalists, speaking broadly, or the media gets criticized for is like what it chooses to cover or what it chooses to bring to people's attention. So seems to me that like there are just other people with the same responsibility now, or the same. Not everyone is living up to that responsibility, but in theory, there are more people besides those that are just that are professionally journalists and media outlets. There are more people that are influencing what people think, like you said. Like I don't mean influencing in a bad way, but to your point, choosing what to focus on and sort of what to talk about in a given moment. That's a responsibility that the news media has had ever since it started. That was the whole point of it.
So sort of in this flattening of access to an audience, somebody who has like, I don't know, 100,000 followers can reach maybe even as many people as some major publication, but without any of the kind of established norms of ethics or whatever. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think that we saw that with the blogging, in the blogging sphere too. That was that's why I think that I see Twitter in sort of a broader context, because I think that we saw the blurring of several lines in their emergence of this ecosystem where it was sort of a combination of commentators and sort of fact finders and whatnot, and then everyone sort of spilled over into Twitter. I don't see Twitter influencers as new necessarily. So this is a problem that has been, I think, it's been sort of in the works for a long time, probably before I'm probably even sort of underestimating how far it goes back in time. This problem of who is the authority on the discussion, if that's the question. I think that the internet itself just flipped that question on its head to some degree.
The fact that so I guess could you elaborate on that? So the idea that there's no authority, or
some of it used to just be sort of people use like the printing press as a cliched example, like the internet, there being some analog to that, the emergence of the internet, like some sort of new printing press. The printing press allowed more people to express their ideas to a broader audience, and And then print media publications built a business model of creating a print product that had a certain kind of an advertisement that companies found worth paying a fair amount of money to place in the print magazine product, which in general was the product of a lot of work and a huge team and a lot of capital intensive product for what it is. The internet quickly showed that maybe those advertisements aren't worth that same what people thought they were, and at the same time broadened access and gave more people the opportunity to reach broader audiences. And so the media establishment, to the extent that had come to be, took two hits there. And I'm not a media historian or anything like that. I'm trying to speak generally about what I think happened to journalism as a result of just the technological change that is the internet.
So I guess, so what about the fact that, so the business model of journalism has changed for sure. What do you think about the sort of change in the incentives so blogging, you post and you just post whatever you are thinking. But when on a social network, you're incentivized to post, sure, but you are incentivized to do so in such a way that you kind of favors dunking and snark and things like that. And I think that is kind of where a lot of the current animosity stems from. Is that a change that you have seen?
I think that's right. I think that there's it's worth having a larger conversation about how professional journalists should conduct themselves on this platform.
Yeah, I don't think we should touch that right now because that is a very deep conversation. So I guess changing gears, the thing that started us talking was actually, we started talking about the animosity towards blue checks, quote unquote blue checks. What do you think about that?
Well, I remember that when I first started seeing it, it struck me that it was some kind of a slur. And so I tried to reverse engineer it. And I was really confused because one day when I was at Tech Review, the editor-in-chief said, everybody's going to send Twitter an email and you're all going to get a blue check. And then we got blue checks. And this was maybe 7 years ago or something like that. And so I didn't really understand what that was. So I tried to understand it. But I think that one of the reasons I brought it up to you is that it seems like part of a larger thing that I'm sort of sensitive to as a professional reporter, that is like, it's sort of this anti-media sentiment among people that I encounter in my crypto media social media echo sphere, basically.
Yeah, we do kind of live in a bit of an extreme little sphere. So I don't know, the blue check thing, it doesn't surprise me, first of all, because you have a platform where sort of the idea is that everybody has a voice for the most part. You already have a bit of kind of almost classes because of some people have a lot of followers and some people have not so many followers. And then you add this sort of visible badge onto a profile. And like that badge, even though at its simplest level, it denotes kind of this person is who they say they are. And the original purpose of it was to keep people from posing as journalists and saying there's like, I don't know, a tornado or like some fake, like actual fake news and scaring people or whatever. That badge has become like almost its own sort of class signifier. And the fact that what a person with a blue check says has morphed from, yes, this is really that person saying it, to this person has more authority on whatever they're saying. They have a little bit more authority than somebody who doesn't to say it. And from there stems that animosity.
Right. Well, I'm not sure Twitter has been that great at being clear about who should get a blue check and who shouldn't. I mean, I have colleagues at the block who should have it because it would be easy to impersonate them and try to pretend like something happened in the crypto market that did not happen. So why aren't they? I mean, I don't really care that much. I think that like the whole thing is just blown out of proportion a little bit. I guess the thing that I'm focused on is that it struck me as a little bit of a slur. And I think that people should keep in mind that journalists and reporters are not the ones deciding who gets blue checks or not. But they should also sort of I think this also raises the question, I mean, who should have that blue check? Who should, in theory, if it was a perfect system, who should have it and why?
Right. I guess I think about it as if a perfect system would probably be anyone who is claiming, whose name is who they say they are, right? So any authenticated person. You see people, I disagree with this, but you see every now and then somebody, usually with a blue check, is suggesting that anonymous posting should not be allowed on Twitter. It's usually because they're getting yelled at for some opinion that they had. I think that a system where you could choose to be kind of validated that you are who you say you are, and then maybe allow people to filter to only see validated responses, that actually could probably do a lot to curb harassment too. But I do think that the non-validated, the kind of the anons should be visible and sort of respected.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, to the extent that this gets into sort of Twitter product, like critiques of Twitter's product, I mean, I don't really know what to do. I don't know what to say to them about how they should make it better, but it does seem like there should be, in theory, it could be a lot better executed system.
What do you think about getting rid of quote tweets? That's a common one.
What is the rationale?
That they, so we originally had just the retweet, right? And the problem was that you couldn't retweet and say what you want to say about the tweet. And the quote tweet seems to solve that. But the problem is that it has turned into more of a dunking tool, right? The only reason you really quote tweet someone is to say, this is a stupid tweet.
Well, before the quote tweet, there was just the manual RT. And that was one of the first things that I encountered when I joined. So people could still just do RT and then quote tweet. Like they don't need it.
Yeah, people weren't really doing that after the native was introduced.
Yeah, so it'll just come back.
Yeah, people will find a way, is what you're saying. They'll find a way to
exactly
to be mean.
That's one of the things that I love about Twitter is how certain norms and behaviors just arose organically and didn't have anything to do with the features of the platform necessarily.
Even if sometimes those norms were like, I guess what I'm thinking about is the conversation health part of it, right? The fact that we are always, there's sort of this gravity that pulls you towards being negative about everything, and particularly being bad faith or insulting in whatever you say. And it feels like it takes a lot of work to resist that. And I think that the key to, or the easiest path to success on Twitter is to give in to that, right? Pick a tribe and start swinging. I just like, I don't know, make fun of people's appearance and stuff. That's something you see a lot these days. So I just wonder if if the system is sort of fundamentally breaking the way that we all talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, maybe it could be. Maybe it's just a reflection in the same way that sometimes we feel like the internet is sort of gone awry on some level. Maybe Twitter is just a new sort of reflection of that, or like an echo of that. But I mean, maybe the reason that I think sometimes it seems like hardly anyone sees my tweets is that, first of all, I hardly ever tweet. But secondly, I don't, I really don't like trolling or getting in fights. I generally, if I agree with someone, I try to talk to them in the direct messages. But I do think that this gets to our larger question, because I think as sort of, maybe even you could just take the president, for example, but there are other examples, which we don't really have to get into, of like, where sometimes it appears that the platform's tendency to reinforce fighting and conflict and trolling is just, people just are sort of using that to their fullest advantage to raise their own profile, just for the sake of raising their own profile, and sort of maybe getting some kind of a message across, but mostly not. Mostly because in many cases that message is actually not very coherent or refined. So this, like, I mean, we're not going to get into specifics really, like we talked about, but this fight between media and the media, quote unquote, and tech, or journalists versus Silicon Valley, basically, it's kind of real and kind of not real at the same time. Like, I think, as we've discussed, I mean, it's driving real coverage. There was a New Yorker piece that's pretty recently published that I'm still going through. Someone, I think, at The Verge wrote about this. But in many cases, if one sort of unfollows the main people on Twitter, they can sort of pretend like it's just happening in this really sort of obscure neck of the media woods. But I think that that's where you and I see it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I'm the most online of my friends by a long shot, and they have absolutely no idea that any of this stuff is going on, and it doesn't affect them at all. And I'm actually quite jealous of them for that. And that always makes me just wonder, is this a waste of time? Probably. I mean, grand scheme of things, yeah, everything kind of is. But it just like, what do these various fights do? Do they actually accomplish anything besides kind of somebody writes another, a response to a response to a response? Like, does any policy change? Does anything concrete really happen? I kind of doubt it.
It depends on what the goal is, I think, when we ask the question of what it achieves. And that is sometimes refers to politics, I guess, in at least vaguely. Because in that context, the goals are different depending on who you're speaking with. And so it would make sense that people would be at odds. And so it would make sense that there would be fights. In other cases, maybe there are more productive ways of maybe the goals are actually more in common, and there are more productive ways of achieving them than fighting on Twitter. And I don't know.
Yeah, probably the biggest problem I've seen as far as I guess fighting on Twitter being inefficient is the way that everyone, okay, so let's say some fight happens, sides quickly split and are formed, the two factions. And then each side comes up with its own sort of definition of the key terms or even what happened. And then they all start defending those, and then they come up with sort of a version of what the other side came up with that is probably weaker than what the other side thinks, and start attacking that. And then they yell past each other without ever actually attacking the points that the other side is making. And so much energy gets expended on doing this, and like people get dragged in. There's people who are these sort of lifetime or kind of full-time brawlers on Twitter, mostly in politics, but you also see them even in crypto land. And it's like, I just don't get the point. Are they moving the ball forward to anybody? So I guess the charitable case is that they are maybe convincing, like, let's say there's two groups that both believe two things that are at odds with each other. Some would say like Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, even though I don't necessarily agree with that. Does the fighting convince people who are waiting in the wings or on the fringes that one way is the superior mindset, or does it just turn off everybody who's watching? I think it turns off everybody.
Well, I think I'm in an interesting position because I get paid to pay attention. So even when I'm sick of it, I still get paid to pay attention. So I'll still do it because there's still an incentive for me to pay attention. And sometimes it just reminds me that in some ways that this is just humans trying to do stuff together. And in that sense is not a new thing, no matter how some of these projects are marketed, or no matter how novel some of these applications actually are. It's still just people trying to work together, and it gets really messy, and people trying to compete in the marketplace. The marketplace literally, but also in the marketplace of ideas, sort of as a derivative of that. And it gets messy. So that's not unique to crypto, but it can be sort of something that is a turnoff, I think. Like if I didn't get paid to pay attention to it, I'd probably sometimes just stop paying attention to it for weeks on end, because there have been some pretty boring stretches in crypto history, and all there is people just sniping at each other on Twitter, and it's like, it gets old.
Yeah, the analogy that I kind of have in my head, or the image I have in my head, is crypto Twitter during periods of lulls in activity. It's sort of like two bears fighting on a ice floe that's just melting, and like there's no point because they both die at the end anyway. It's like, it's just, I don't know, I don't get it. But it's so not unique to crypto land. It's completely everywhere. There's so many small beefs online, or big beefs, it's all over the place, and I don't get it.
Yeah, so I think that we're in agreement. I think other people think that the fighting is moving the ball. So then now we're fighting about whether or not the fighting is moving the ball. So
we got to get in there.
We need to find some common ground with the people that that don't see it the way that we're seeing it right now. But that's, I think, the key is that, to your point, sometimes I think people have a make-believe version of what the other side is arguing that's really weak, and so it's really easy to take down. And when it seems that easy to take down, then maybe you should second guess whether or not that's actually the argument. Maybe seek out some better sources of information on whether or not that's actually the argument.
Well, that's actually why I enjoyed talking to you so much over the last couple of months, because I live in the tech world, and I see a lot of reductive arguments about the incentives of media and that type of stuff. And so talking to you has been very useful in just sort of understanding a little bit more about what goes on your side of the court.
Right. Yeah, I think we have similar. We pay attention to similar things, but we have different goals. So I think that ties together a lot of what we talked about today, actually.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This has been really fun, and we'll have you on again soon.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
All right. Bye.